Chapter 5 40 Days After. In the morning, I ran. I got up before everyone else did, slid on my tennis shoes, and took off through the redwoods. It was early and a little bit cold, which helped to shake my sleep haze. I broke through my headache with each strike of foot against trail, and I worked my way up the hills, shaded by a thick canopy of tree branches. It was foggy and damp, but the spicy smell of the woods worked to sharpen my thoughts and focus my breathing. I pushed back against Beckett's words, against the sound of my mother crying softly on the other side of my bedroom wall every night since April 18th. I'm glad you found something like that, my dad said once when I'd come back from running in our neighborhood with my t shirt damp against my back as I stood in front of the house and watched him working on his motorcycle on the sidewalk outside the garage. Something like what? I leaned into a stretching lunge, my breath slowing but my skin still hot and prickly from running the Pacific Heights hills. Something you can use to get out all that teenagerness. He eyed me from a crouched position by the back tire of his 1988 Ducati. He had three bikes, but this was by far his favorite. It was red and black 750 Sport. It was a red and black 750 Sport, and even though it gave him the most trouble, he said he'd always liked it best because he bought it in the spring he and my mom found out they were pregnant with me. Teenagerness? I said. I'm pretty sure that's not a word. He picked up a wrench, looked at it, and then at the bike, and dropped it back onto the pavement. This may come as a surprise to you, he said, but I actually remember what it's like to be a teenager. It really wasn't all that long ago when it happened to me. Behind me on California Street, a bus buzzed by and someone honked their horn. It was the weekend, a Sunday maybe, and the sidewalk was clogged with people walking dogs, jogging in pairs, and rushing to or from the bus stop. A group of kids moved past a pair of older women going in church clothes to the other side of the street. It must have been early fall, September or October. I don't believe it, I said, my eyes teasing him. You were a teenager once? And it was awful. I mean, brutal stuff those years. Acne and trying to fit in, being short for my class, not athletic enough, working for good grades, but trying to seem cool at the same time. God knows no one likes the smartest kid in the class. He picked up a different size wrench and began tugging it on a bolt near the tire. Nuh-uh, I said. Smartest kid in the class is inevitably bottom of the food chain. He nodded but rolled his eyes. And hormones? What a mess. The hormones were out of control. Gross, Dad. He laughed, and behind us, my mom opened the front door and called, "What are you two doing out there?" I'm just saying it's good you have something like running when you need to clear your head, when you need to burn off some of that teenagerness, he said. It's good for you. You guys getting hungry? She asked from the top of the stairs. I've got baked mac and cheese in the oven. Be right in, baby, he said to my mom, and then he looked at me again. All I'm saying is that I'm proud of you, Callie. You're a good kid, which makes me feel like your mom and I might actually be okay parents. I nudged his gray tennis shoe with my blue tennis shoe and smiled. You got that right, I said. Back at the campsite, Beckett and Maddie were breaking down the tents while Rabbit loaded up the car with the coolers, the cooking equipment, and the guitars. Look what the cat dragged in, Rabbit said when I showed up. You okay? Asked Beckett, and I nodded. Sure, I'm okay, I told him. Really? Because you kind of look like you got your ass kicked last night, Rabbit said. And Maddie said, Rabbit, leave it be, as she ducked out of the tent and began plucking the tarp clips off the aluminum poles. I don't know what you're talking about. I put my fingers to my eye, then tender like. I could tell it was a little swollen, and judging from the look Maddie gave me, ripening into my first black eye. You two, Rabbit said. If I weren't 100% sold that you were 100% gay, I'd blame it on sexual tension. Gross, Beckett and I said at the same time. Rabbit was sitting on the hood of his Volvo, but I can tell it's a brother sister thing, he said. I'm the same way with my siblings. They drive me nuts when we're together, but I miss them like crazy when we're not. I helped clean up, and then we loaded back into the car and headed north, me and Maddie in the back this time, Beckett up front. First stop, grub. I need food like a fish needs water, Beckett said. Second stop, Rabbit asked, and Beckett said, MoMA. On a holiday weekend, it'll be packed. I was tired. I figured we all were, and nothing sounded worse than a crowded museum. I wanted a shower, a long, hot one. I wanted my bed and the sound of my mom puttering around the house while I napped under the bay window in my bedroom. That was the best part of summertime, afternoon naps. But Beckett shook his head. You, my friend, get no vote. I already bought our passes online, so we won't have to wait for tickets, he said. This is my thing, the thing I picked to kick off summer break, he told me. Besides, it'll be good not to think about all that crappy stuff for a while. And then, just for today, tomorrow we'll start looking for your dad all over again. We went to the Grove on Mission Street and ordered from the chalkboard menu on the wall above the counter pot pies, hummus and cheese plates, and BLTs. There was a hipster behind the register in skinny jeans and a Sonic Youth t shirt, and Beckett used the band as an excuse to flirt with him while we waited for our food. It's like punk meets indie meets avant garde, right? He said, and leaned toward the kid on the other side of the counter. The best combination by far. Absolutely, the boy said back. I could listen to that album all day long. It was crowded, but we scored a big wooden table by the window and settled in, hot coffee in hand, sunlight on the bench seat, and a buzz of the city on the weekend. The Grove was one of my favorite cafes in San Francisco. Next to us, a couple shared a bottle of white wine and red paperbacks. The girl sporting blue dip-dyed hair and a strapless sundress, the boy in rocker jeans and a bow tie. And for a minute, just a quick one or two, with the windows open and the sound of street traffic merging with the hum of cafe conversation, for a minute it felt like things could be normal again. I reek of campfire, Maddie said, as she pulled her shoulder length hair into a ponytail. Better than morning run sweat, I said. He's really making us go straight to the museum? I asked, looking at Beckett as he scribbled something on a napkin for the guy behind the counter. I think showers first would be in everyone's best interest. When the man makes up his mind, Rabbit said, and shrugged. It's a historical exhibit about the earthquake, Maddie told us, for the 100th anniversary. We spent a week studying the 1906 quake in history class that spring, and most of the newspapers had done some kind of feature or another on in April, so I was surprised I hadn't heard about the exhibit at the MoMA. Mission accomplished, Beckett said when he sat back down. Digits shared with the hot hipster at the register. He smiled. What are we talking about? The exhibit, I said, and someone at the front of the cafe called our number for the food, so Rabbit slid out from behind the table. I'm on it, he said, heading to the counter. It's called A Disaster in Pictures, Beckett told me. Sounds uplifting. No, it's like history and stuff, before and after, shots of the earthquake compared to now. It's supposed to be really good, he said. Okay, we'll go, I said, and then getting more serious. Thanks, Beckett, for the camping trip and the museum tickets. It's been a good weekend. Minus the black eye, you mean, Maddie said. Minus that. You should check yourself out in the bathroom, he told me. We might need to move you to vocals, put you front and center. You look super hardcore, bruised up like that. I could never do vocals, I told her. That's your gig. No one owns an audience like you do, I said, and she smiled, the pink rushing to her cheeks. Once things got going with nothing right, my dad started asking questions. When can I hear you play? Not yet. We're still in the warm up phase. Well, what style is it? What genre? It's more complicated than that, than just one genre. We're kind of like the Smiths or Nirvana, maybe, with cat power vocals. I don't think we believe in labels, really. So who's the front man? Front man? No one, calls it that, Dad. Well, who writes the lyrics? Who's the leader? There is no leader. Maddie's on vocals, she writes the melodies, and Rabbit's on bass. But the drummer establishes the pace, right? The tempo of the music? Yeah, I set the tone through the rhythm, I told him, but I'm the one that finds the feel of the songs and sets everything up. He nodded. I get it. You stay tucked behind the drum kit, but really you're taking the lead with no one realizing it. He smiled. You control things, but you don't need the spotlight. Noble. I like that. My silent warrior, he said. I shrugged, but looking back, I realized he'd found the right words to describe my role before I did. The food looked amazing when Rabbit brought it to the table, and I was suddenly so thankful for school being over, for the summer stretching out ahead, and for Beckett's promise to help me start searching for clues about my dad. He had to be somewhere, and I knew that wherever he was, he'd be looking to find his way back to us. We eat, and then we roll, Beckett said. It's almost noon. But Rabbit shook his head. We should make that We should make that game plan, he said. That list you guys were talking about last night. I looked at Beckett and he looked at me, thinking of the conversation in the tent. What? We were camping, Rabbit said. It's not like tents have walls. Come on. It's not eavesdropping when we're sleeping outdoors. So Rabbit got another napkin and borrowed a pen from the counter kid after we'd finished eating. On top, he wrote, "Find Aaron Pace," and underlined it. We need to establish a baseline so we can develop a systematic and efficient method to examine all the potential "where did he freaking go" options, he said. And he was taking Intro to Business and Psychology 101 that semester at SF State, and I watched as he morphed back into the student I'd known in the AP classes we both took the year before, the student who got Maddie's attention in the first place. "Have you personally called all of his coworkers?" he asked me, and I shook my head. So he wrote, 1. Coworkers. We can probably find his office directory online or by calling and requesting it. Then we can divvy up the list alphabetically. It's easier for people to shaft you on email, so we have to get telephone numbers, he told us. Like I said, a system. The coffee boy crush stopped by our table and put a mug down in front of Beckett. "Another latte," he said, in case you wanted a second one. "It's on the house." They did a funny smile thing you do with someone you think you'd like to get to know better, and then he walked away. "Good God," Rabbit said. "Get a room already." "Okay, have you found that homeless guy the police talked to?" he asked, and I shook my head again. Next to me, Maddie said, "Good call. I bet he'd be more likely to give us information than the cops. We should definitely talk to him if we ever find him." Rabbit wrote, 2. Find the homeless guy who was probably too paranoid to tell the cops all of the truth. "How about your garage? He hung out there a lot, right? Working on his bikes?" he asked, and I nodded. "Have you snooped around down there?" I shook my head and said, "What's wrong with me? What have I been doing all this time?" Rabbit wrote, 3. Get nosy in the garage. And Maddie said, "You've been grieving," but then must have immediately regretted it because she rushed right into, "Not grieving, that's the wrong word. You've just been in shock, that's all, like trauma shock, maybe mixed with a little denial." "I've been an idiot, is what I've been," I said, but all 3 of them shook their heads no. Beckett said, "Look, it's been a few weeks, no big deal. You sunk down into your weird dark rabbit hole, but the whole misery and anguish whatnot, did your whole misery and anguish whatnot, and now we're pulling you back up, onward. It's fine. Today we play, and tomorrow we start with the list of Sherlock Holmes over there is plotting. It's fine," he said again. "We're on it. Now let's hit the road before I bail on this whole museum thing and do something humiliating, like throw myself at that barista." The SF MoMA was within walking distance, and when we got there, Beckett went to pick up our tickets while we stood in the gigantic atrium and people watched the weekend crowd. "Let's motor," he said when he found us again. Photography exhibitions were usually on the 3rd floor, so we headed up the staircase toward the circular skylight that cast light throughout the main building. I hadn't been to the MoMA since my mom's birthday when that photo of Dad and her was taken, and maybe Beckett guessed I was remembering that night because he nudged me and said, "It's going to be fun, I promise," and then, "Just relax." Since it was the weekend, the museum was filled with families, college-age students from all the art programs in the area, and other teenagers like us just looking for something to do. The exhibit was mounted in a series of side rooms that connected to one another like a maze, and we checked the time on our watches and decided to meet an hour later in the cafe if we got split up. We started together in the first room, but soon drifted apart, each taking a different amount of time with each set of pictures. But I liked it better that way, seeing the art at my own pace. Each display showed 2 photos. On the left-hand side, image A, a black and white shot of a place in San Francisco taken within the last few years, mostly 2003 or 2004. And on the right, image B, a photo of the exact same location taken just after the 1906 earthquake and fires. The left side duplicated the viewpoint of the right exactly almost 100 years later, and under each photo there was a caption listing the location or some kind of descriptive detail about the picture, followed by a date and medium information. The photographer, Mark Klett, called it a re-photography project and an examination of our relationship to time and change. His statement at the start of the exhibit said, "The past, the present, and the future lie uncomfortably close together in a curve of probabilities, and they are not necessarily connected by an implied linear flow." He believed the project demonstrated that an anticipated future is never guaranteed by the flow of time in any one direction, which took me forever to wrap my head around. No particular future guarantee, time flowing in any direction, an infinite number of possibilities. There was a constant murmur in the gallery, but the voices of the visitors became white noise once I started paying attention to the art. Some of the photos were what I expected shots of buildings like Grace Cathedral in 2003, pristine and symmetrical, and then next to it, the shell of the church, piles of wood, collapsed arches, and half broken windows. There were pictures of parks in the city that, after the quake and the fires, became refugee camps with draped white tents and makeshift shelters with men on horses riding about. Some photographs were small and you had to get close to see the details, and others were panoramic and you had to stand back to view the whole scene. There were photos that showed cracks, actual splits in the ground running right through the city, with holes like caves you couldn't see the bottom of. I didn't like to look at those too long. I recognized my neighborhood and our cars and trees and bushes on street corners in a modern picture, shot south from Alta Plaza Park. And then, in a blurry one on the right, empty sidewalks except for a handful of horse drawn carriages. How strange and startling it must have been to see the land crack open and the buildings turn to dust on a random morning that shouldn't have been different than any other. And then I saw it. Image 8A, moving car, Sacramento Street near Powell, 2003. On the left, a shot down the hill toward downtown, a moving truck parked on one side of the street with its back hatch open and a small car next to it driving uphill. It was a familiar scene, the street corner where the number one bus dropped me off when I took it from my neighborhood to Union Square. It could have been one of my teacher's cars driving up that hill. It could have been a family I knew from school moving their stuff out of the van and into a new apartment. I'd looked downtown from that exact spot countless times. And on the right side, image 8B, untitled, View of Fire Down Sacramento Street, 1906. A picture of the same street corner, the downtown a smudge of fire and black clouds. Instead of cars and vans lining Sacramento Street, people in chairs watching from the top of the hill, people in chairs watched from the top of the hill as the city burned below them. My breath bottomed out as I studied it, the folding chairs lined up like a movie theater's, the men and women in dark clothing, some with hands raised to their faces, shielding their eyes from the sun maybe, others with fists on their hip as they looked at the smoke and flames. The shock must have stolen their breath away, having to watch the city they lived in and loved burn to ash before their own eyes. And there in the corner, tucked into a sliver of the image that was either underexposed or double exposed, I couldn't be sure which, was a blurry silhouette of a man. Dark hair, small glasses, a profile as familiar to me as if it were my own, a man I couldn't look away from. A man with the face of my father folded into the shadows of a photograph from 1906. Suddenly, there was nothing but me and that photo, the museum having fallen away. His nose, I was sure of it. My father's slight frame and worried mouth. His face tilted downward.